I think that GCC is done for. I don't think it's possible to come back from what's happening. And after this war is done, I think that Israel emerges as a dominant power in the Middle East. It achieves the Greater Israel Project. And the Iranians will not lose this war. They will maintain their sovereignty. But this war is going to destroy a lot of their infrastructure, and they'll have to rebuild. Fortunately, they will be able to control the Strait of Hormuz, and so they'll have the financing necessary to rebuild their nation. And I think that after this war, the Iranians will actually come out much stronger than before. They will control the Strait of Hormuz. They will have a more vibrant, coherent national identity, and they will have upgraded a lot of their military capacity. So maybe after this war, they're destroyed, but they'll rebuild and they'll come out much stronger. And this will lead to, in the long term, regional conflict between Iran and Israel. And in eschatology, in Islamic and in Jewish and in Christian eschatology, this conflict between Iran and Israel, and this is a long-term thing, right? But it is often referred to as the War of Gog and Magog, when the entire world attacks Israel, okay? So, but before that happens, Israel will achieve the Greater Israel Project, and it will create something called Pax Judaica. So imagine that the center of gravity basically transfers from Washington, D.C. to Jerusalem. Why? Because at this point in history, Israel it controls all global trade. It's already built the Ben Gurion Canal, which cuts through Gaza and replaces the Suez Canal. It is the technological and financial center of the Middle East because the GCC has been destroyed, and so whatever oil money there is invested into Israel. You know, the Indian Prime Minister Modi visited Netanyahu before the war before the war began, and it was a very pleasant meeting. And the reason why is that in order to build America, Israel needs to import millions and millions of cheap laborers, and India is the best source of cheap laborers for Israel. So I think that is what they have in mind. You know, a lot of technological companies in the United States, Google, NVIDIA, Oracle, they will probably move to Jerusalem and help build up the technological center of the world, creating an AI surveillance state. So these past few decades, they create this surveillance model in Gaza, and then they'll just scale it out to include the entire Middle East. So that's what I see happening. In the short term, this war will be devastating. In the midterm, Israel will achieve the Greater Israel Project and create Pax Judaica. In the long term, Israel will face the world in a global conflict. Yeah, so I think let's talk political instability, because Israel is notorious for political divisions, right? It's almost impossible to get people to agree on anything. Israelis argue all the time. But this war is going to have a traumatic effect on Israeli society. The democracy is going to have to give way to a theocracy. The religious zealots are going to gain greater control over Israeli society. And whatever is left of an open, cosmopolitan, democratic society will wither away. Basically, Jerusalem will replace Tel Aviv as the heart and center of Israeli society. So that's point one. Point two is that people severely underestimate Israel because it is a small nation in a desert with very few resources. But the real wealth of Israel is the Jewish diaspora spread all around the world. They are extremely well educated, they're technologically savvy, and they are they are extremely united. Like they believe in the Greater Israel Project. So it's possible for Israel to draw on basically unlimited financing, on the most advanced technology, on political support from all over the Jewish diaspora. And I think that once this war is over, Israel will have no peer competitor in the Middle East, meaning that Saudi Arabia will probably be destroyed, and Turkey will be severely weakened in the process. I'll be honest with you, I have very little hope for Turkey. It has suffered a great deal under Erdogan. If you go back and look at how Erdogan came to power and how he cemented power I believe it was in the what year was it, 2018 coup. And anyway, my point is that Turkey is an extremely corrupt and ossified society that is a paper tiger. And if Turkey were to enter this war, you'd be surprised by how badly it does. So Israel, in other words, doesn't have a regional competitor. Iran will be a competitor in the future, but that is in the future. Well, I mean, like, Europe is completely hopeless. It's a hopeless situation. For the past 20 years, America has screwed over Europe. So these wars in the Middle East created millions of refugees who then went to Europe. And I don't know what the Europeans were thinking in allowing these millions of refugees to come into their society when they didn't have the capacity to absorb these millions of refugees, right? So Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, famously said, "We can do it." No, you can't. And time has shown that these millions of refugees have put a tremendous strain on the social cohesion, on the capacity of the state to govern Europe. So there's tremendous political fissures within Europe at this point. And so that's why you see the rise of these right-wing parties throughout Europe. But the main problem, as you point out, is the economy. So Europe suffers from an aging population. So the population itself is no longer as dynamic as it used to be. Before, the German model was very good. It was this, buy cheap Russian energy, make really good German cars, subcontract the labor to Poland, and then sell extremely expensive German cars to China. It's a great model for Germany. But then when Trump came into office, the China market, Germany lost access to the China market. And then when you have this war break out, Germany can no longer buy cheap Russian energy. And as you point out, the Europeans then pivoted to the Middle East, primarily Qatar. And now Qatar has basically shut down all LNG production. And so Europe is completely screwed in the process. And Macron has talked about sending an aircraft carrier to the Middle East. What's that going to do? I mean, send an aircraft carrier so that the Iranians can sink it with a ballistic missile? I mean, what's the point of that? And still at this time, the Europeans are still talking about drafting young men to go die in the trenches of Ukraine in 2029. So the European elite have their head in the sand. They have absolutely no idea what's going on. They have absolutely no solution to the multiple crises that they face. And Europe is a dumpster fire. I hate to say this, but it's a dumpster fire. Right, so there will be three major trends that follow from this, okay? The first major trend is deindustrialization, because you don't have access to cheap energy. So you need to make your economy much more balanced. Before we have the growth of urban centers, which engage in the knowledge economy, which engage in AI, in EV, in solar panels, right? But all of that requires access to cheap energy, which is what the Middle East provided. But now that the Middle East is going to be destroyed or be engulfed in war for the next 10, 20 years, you have to deindustrialize. You have to focus more on self-sufficiency, okay? So that's the first trend, deindustrialization. Second major trend is mercantilism, okay? And what I mean by that is that the global order is dead. And so what you need to do is basically focus on local trade or creating your own supply networks, spheres of influence, okay? And the third major trend, which is the most troubling, is remilitarization. Because Pax Americana is dead, and Pax Judaica is not interested in protecting you from big bad bullies, okay? So it's either you rearm as soon as possible and defend yourself, or you'll be eaten alive by a wolf, right? So I think in East Asia, the first nation to recognize the changing world order, because it has no choice in the matter, is Japan. I think that they brought in Prime Minister Takaichi because she appealed to the young, and she has the charisma to galvanize the young to make the sacrifices necessary in order to deindustrialize, remilitarize, and create a self-sufficient economic system. So I think that Japan will actually suffer in the beginning, but they will actually be in the forefront of global change. And nations that absolutely refuse to make these three necessary changes will be the most likely to suffer. And quite honestly, I have very little hope for my own country, which is China. I think that because of these changes, Japan will start to emerge as the local hegemon, while China is still stuck to the old global order. But in the short term, what this means is that the United States and China will have a rapprochement. Okay, so even though this war has started, Trump will still visit Beijing March 31st, at the end of this month, for a 3-day state visit. And I think that people will be surprised by how friendly and productive this meeting will be. And in fact, actually this year, there are scheduled 3 major summits between China and the United States. And so I think that both nations are working towards a rapprochement in order to repair the global order. But there's no saving the global order. It's dying. And so if you omit this reality and commit to revamping society, deindustrialization, remilitarization, and moving towards a self-sufficient economy, then you are much more likely to weather the storm that is coming. Right. So I personally think that of all the world leaders, Vladimir Putin is the only one with a grand strategy. He's a very capable leader, and he sees the big picture. He plays chess. And so what he's waiting for is a U.S. ground invasion of Iran. That's what he's waiting for. Because once the United States sends in ground troops, then the United States is all in. It can't extricate itself from the situation. And at any point, the United States can stop this air campaign and say, you know what? We killed the Ayatollah, we destroyed the Iranian nuclear threat, so we're gonna go home, guys, goodbye, okay? But once the United States sends in ground troops, then it's locked in to this Iranian quagmire for 5 to 10 years, and there's no escaping. It'll be like another Vietnam, right? This gives Putin and Russia the perfect opportunity to move towards Odessa, which is the real goal and the end goal of this war in Ukraine. Because once they have Odessa, then they have basically achieved all their major military objectives. And so what's going to happen is the Europeans will have no choice but to defend Odessa to the last European. And that's where the next major conflict will be, the siege of Odessa. And if the siege of Odessa were to happen, the Europeans would exhaust themselves defending against the Russian attack. The Russians have perfected drone artillery warfare in the trenches of Ukraine, and that's a perfect combination if you are to besiege Odessa. And so the Europeans, they may be fresh, but they will be inexperienced. And so they will make a lot of mistakes, they will lose a lot of casualties, and this war will eventually become so unpopular back in Europe that the population would revolt against the governments, okay? So remember, this is a time of nuclear war, so you can't actually destroy each other's military. What you can do is put so much stress and pain on the political system that the citizens ultimately rebel and overthrow the political system and impose a new system that is much more friendly towards Russia. So that, I think, is the grand plan that Putin has, and it's gonna work. The big question that people have is, first of all, are the Americans going to use ground troops? Because the only way that you can defeat Iran is by using ground troops, okay? That's a big question we will look at over the next few weeks. Will America send its army, 500,000, 2 million soldiers, to topple the government? Okay, that's question number 1. Question number 2, nuclear weapons. If you're losing a war, would you choose to use nuclear weapons? Okay, that's another big question that we have, okay? Another big question that we have is who gets involved? Because this situation is so dire that Europe, okay, specifically Germany, France, and Britain are talking about entering this war. And guess what? If that happens, it is possible that Russia and China will also enter this war on the side of the Iranians. This is World War III. Because of the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, because of the importance of the Middle East, everyone has to get involved at some point. And we're going to use game theory to really try to understand what's happening on the ground and where this could lead us. There are American bases all over the Middle East. And originally, these bases were established to protect them from basically their own people, okay? These are monarchies that were imposed on these nations by the Anglo-American Empire, the British first, and then the Americans came to support these monarchies. And so they provide defense. But then you're like,
wait a minute here. I mean, didn't we just say that these American bases can actually defend these people, that they're exposed? And the answer is yes, that's true. But remember that the American military was built during the Cold War. And the Cold War was a war between the Soviet Union and America. And so the Cold War was defined as something called MAD, mutually assured destruction, because both had nuclear weapons, okay? So they didn't really go to war against each other. And so in other words, these bases aren't really meant to defend these nations from other enemies. They're really meant to impose American authority in the Middle East, okay? And it's the idea of this. It's the idea that empire, it is really an image. It is a hallucination. It's just an idea. Empire is it's an aura of invincibility and invisibility, okay? If you fear it, then you obey it. But it's not really designed to fight a war, okay? And so that's why we have this absurd situation. And because there are so many bases in the GCC, that gives the Iranians the perfect pretext to attack them in order to destroy the GCC economy, which will destroy the American empire. So this is how the war is shaping out, okay? So the red is the Israelis and the Americans, the yellow are the Iranians. And as you can see, the Iranians are attacking everywhere, primarily Israel, okay? But also, as you can see, a lot of focus on Bahrain and Qatar. And again, the intention is to destabilize the economy and the government. It's to try to get as much instability as possible, okay? And as you can see, the Americans and the Israelis are focused on Tehran. And so the Americans and the Israelis use something we call shock and awe. And the very idea of shock and awe is you decapitate the enemy. If you cut off the head, the body will fall down, okay? The problem, though, is, again, the Iranians see this as a religious war. And so the Iranians have announced total war, okay? And so what this means is that right now, command and control in Iran is decentralized. There's no one person telling everyone what to do. Every region has its own orders, has its own strategy. And so if you knock out Tehran, everyone else keeps on going. So if you take off the head, it doesn't change anything, okay? But unfortunately, the Israelis and the Americans use this as a military doctrine. So doctrine just means how you design your military for what purpose. And so even though the Americans seem like an invincible army, they are not equipped to fight a 21st century war against drones, against destabilization, against religious fanatics. They're just not, right? But unfortunately, because of military doctrine, they're gonna keep on attacking Tehran. Now, the great irony of all this is that the Iranians who would be most supportive of regime change, are actually in the cities, because they are educated, they're progressive. The people who are most fundamentally against you, will fight you to the death, are religious fanatics, the Shia militants, living in the rural areas, okay? So this is a really silly thing where you are actually destroying those who will most likely support you, and you're leaving alone those who are most likely to commit jihad against you. So another idea that I want you guys to understand is the idea of asymmetry. Asymmetry, all right? So what is asymmetry? Asymmetry means that the two sides are choosing to fight different wars using different techniques because one is much stronger than the other, okay? America is a great empire. It has unlimited resources. It has the USD. It controls the world, right? Iran is a country that has been under economic sanctions for the past 45 years. It's poor. Its technology is very limited, okay? But as we learn in this class, actually, those nations that are poor actually have more energy. They're more open, and they're more cohesive. All right, so let me give you an example. This is what we call the Shahad drones. Shahad drones. Each of these drones costs $50,000 at most, okay? At most. It can go as cheap as $35,000 US. But one of them is $50,000. As you can see, you can fit a lot of these drones to a truck that can go anywhere in Iran, and they can hide anywhere, all right? So the thing to understand is, first of all, these drones are cheap, they're easy to make. They make about 500 a day, okay? And estimates are about there's 80,000 right now that the Iranians have. So they can go on for a long, long time. Okay, and one of these drones, again, can knock out a desalination plant, it can knock out an oil field, it can knock out a hotel, it can do a lot of damage. And it's easily transportable. You can hide it anywhere. You can use it from anywhere, okay? And that's what the Iranians are using as an offensive weapon. And how do the Americans defend against this? They use something called a THAAD, right? Right, guys. This is what they use, THAAD. THAAD stands for Thermal High Altitude Air Defense. And they also have like Patriot systems. There's a lot, okay? The thing that you need to know about the system is it's really expensive. This missile, guys, costs $1 million. $1 million. So there's a $1,000 drone coming your way, and you throw $1 million missile at it, okay? And often these missiles miss, so you have to throw 2 or 3 missiles at it, okay? So you're spending $2 to $3 million on each $50,000 that the Iranians spend. That's kind of silly. Second thing you'll notice is that this thing is really big and really slow, and therefore you can't really move it around. Therefore, it's pretty easy for the Iranians to spot where this is and attack it. And then when these things blow up, that's a lot of money, guys. Then you're like, but this makes no sense. You know the Iranians have drones. They've had drones for like 10 years. You've also seen drones used in the Russia-Ukraine war to devastating effect. Why don't the Americans know this? Why did they prepare? Okay, and again, it has to do with military doctrine. Because military doctrine determines how you fight a war, it determines on your bureaucracy, and it determines how you spend your resources, okay? And unfortunately, the Americans are used to fighting something called the Cold War, right? And the Cold War, because you can actually fight the war, you can actually kill each other because then people use nuclear weapons. The Cold War was about flexing, okay? You see how big and powerful I am? Me! Okay? That's all it was.